What if I told you that the most efficient, hardworking, and loyal CEO in the history of England was fired by an axe? Let's start at the end. It is July 28th, 1540. A man is kneeling on a scaffold on Tower Hill. He is dressed in black. He is calm. He is terrifyingly composed. His name is Thomas Cromwell. If you know history, you know him as the villain. He is the blacksmith's son, the butcher, the man who destroyed the monasteries and framed Anne Boleyn. For 500 years, we have been told that he was a monster who deserved to die. Stop right there. That is absolute propaganda written by the rich Nepo babies who hated him. Here is the twist. Thomas Cromwell wasn't a villain. He was the victim of the most hostile corporate takeover in history. He was the original self-made man. He clawed his way up from the slums to become the most powerful man in the country. He modernized the government. He created the welfare state. He made the king rich. And his reward for a decade of flawless performance, record-breaking profits, and absolute loyalty, his boss chopped his head off. And it wasn't even a clean cut. History tells us the executioner was inexperienced. Rumors say he was drunk, or maybe paid by Cromwell's enemies to make it painful. It didn't take one swing. It took 3 or 4 hacks to sever the head of Thomas Cromwell. It was a butchery. Why? Because he made one fatal mistake. He thought that if he worked hard enough, if he made himself indispensable enough, if he fixed enough problems, his boss would love him. He was wrong. He didn't realize he was working for a narcissist. This isn't just a story about a guy in a funny hat 500 years ago. This is a brutal case study on toxic workplace culture, gaslighting, and corporate burnout. If you have ever had a boss who took credit for your work, blamed you for their mistakes, and then fired you the second you weren't useful, then you need to hear the story of Thomas Cromwell. Let's see. Are you ready to meet the man who built the machine that eventually killed him? If you are ready to expose the bloodiest firing in corporate history, hit that subscribe button, because in the court of Henry VIII, there is no HR department to save you, only the axe. Let's get to work. To understand why Cromwell was so dangerous to the establishment, you have to understand where he came from. The Tudor court was a country club. It was full of what we would call Nepo babies. The Dukes of Norfolk, the Earls, the Boleyns, the Seymours, they were all born into money. They got their jobs because of their last names. They went to the same schools, married their cousins, and lived in a bubble of privilege. They had soft hands. Cromwell, he had scars. He was born in Putney, which at the time was a rough, working-class slum outside London. His father, Walter Cromwell, wasn't just a blacksmith and a brewer. He was a town bully. Court records show Walter was constantly getting fined for watering down his beer and assaulting his neighbors. He was a violent drunk. Young Thomas grew up getting beaten. So he did what any smart kid in a toxic household would do. He ran away. At age 15, he left England with nothing but the clothes on his back. And this is where his resume gets insane. He didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge. He went to the University of the Streets, Italy. He fought as a mercenary soldier in the French army at the Battle of Garigliano. Imagine a teenager holding a pike, marching through mud and blood. He learned how to kill before he learned how to debate. Florence. He worked for the Frescobaldi banking family. He learned high finance. He learned how to count money, how to lend it, and how to collect it from people who didn't want to pay. Antwerp. He worked in the cloth trade. He learned negotiation. He learned languages. By the time he came back to England in his late 20s, Thomas Cromwell was a machine. He spoke Latin, Italian, French, and German fluently. He knew the law. He knew finance. He knew war. While the English aristocrats were busy jousting, reciting poetry, and worrying about which fork to use, Cromwell was looking at spreadsheets. He realized something the others didn't. Money is power. And if you control the money, you control the king. He started working for Cardinal Wolsey, the previous CEO of England. But when Wolsey failed to get Henry VIII, his divorce, Henry fired him. Wolsey died in disgrace. Everyone abandoned Wolsey. The rats fled the sinking ship. Everyone, except Cromwell. Cromwell stayed loyal to his old boss until the very end. He defended him in Parliament. And Henry VIII noticed. Henry looked at this blacksmith's son and thought, I need a guy like that. A guy who is loyal. A guy who gets things done. A guy who doesn't ask questions. And just like that, the street fighter became the king's right hand. Here is the job description Cromwell walked into. Henry VIII has 2 massive problems. Problem 1, he wants to divorce his wife, Catherine of Aragon, to marry his mistress, Anne Boleyn. The Pope says, no. The entire English government is paralyzed. Problem 2. Henry is broke. He has spent all his dad's money on wars and parties. The aristocrats are useless. They are arguing about theology. Cromwell steps in and says, "Boss, you're thinking too small. Why are we asking the Pope for permission? Who is the Pope? He's just a guy in a funny hat in Italy. Why don't you just fire the Pope?" Cromwell proposes a radical idea, the royal supremacy. He suggests that Henry should declare himself the head of the Church of England. It was the Brexit of the 16th century. It was illegal. It was heretical. It was insane. But Cromwell made it happen. He drafted the laws. He bullied Parliament. He intimidated the bishops. He got Henry his divorce. He got Anne Boleyn her crown. But then, Cromwell solved problem number 2. He looked at the books. He saw that the Catholic monasteries owned about 25% of all the land in England. These weren't just churches, they were corporations. They were sitting on mountains of gold, silver, lead, and prime real estate. To Cromwell, the monasteries were underperforming assets. So, he organized the biggest hostile takeover in history. It's called the dissolution of the monasteries. He sent inspectors, his own men, to find corruption in the monasteries. They found exactly what they were paid to find. Cromwell shut them down. He evicted the monks. He seized the land. He melted down the gold crosses. He stripped the lead off the roofs. He funneled millions of pounds into the king's pocket. Henry VIII became the richest king in English history because of Cromwell. Cromwell didn't just do his job, he saved the company from bankruptcy. Do you think so? Do you think Cromwell did this because he hated monks? Or was he just a ruthless pragmatist who saw a pile of cash and knew his boss wanted it to Cromwell? Religion wasn't spiritual, it was a business transaction. But working for Henry VIII isn't just about finance. It's about HR issues, and by HR issues, I mean Henry's habit of wanting to get rid of his wives when they stopped being fun. 1536. 3 years after Cromwell helped make Anne Boleyn queen. The marriage is failing. Anne hasn't given Henry a son. She has a sharp tongue. She argues with Henry. She is difficult. Henry is tired of her. He wants to marry Jane Seymour, the quiet girl who doesn't talk back. He calls Cromwell into his office and says, "Fix it. Get rid of her. Now." This is where it gets dark. Cromwell and Anne Boleyn were actually allies once. They were both Protestants. They both hated the Pope. But Cromwell knows the golden rule of the Tudor court. The boss is always right. If he doesn't remove Anne, Henry will remove him. It's her head or his head. So, Cromwell becomes the cleaner. He engineers the trial of the century. He needs a crime that is so horrible, so shocking, that nobody will defend Anne. Adultery isn't enough. So he invents a narrative, incest and treason. He tortures a musician named Mark Smeaton until he confesses to sleeping with the queen. He gathers witnesses to say Anne slept with her own brother. Was it true? Absolutely not. Most historians agree Anne was innocent. Did Cromwell know it was a lie? Yes. Did he care? No. In Cromwell's mind, he was executing a necessary corporate restructuring. Anne was a liability. She had to go. He set up the legal framework. He presided over the investigation. He signed the papers. He stood by the scaffold on May 19th, 1536, and watched Anne Boleyn lose her head. He didn't do it because he was a monster. He did it because it was his deliverable for Q2. He hit his KP is. The king was happy. The company was stable. For 10 years, Cromwell was untouchable. He was made the Earl of Essex. He was the Lord Privy Seal. He was incredibly rich. He had defeated the Pope, the monks, and the Queen. He thought he was safe, but in a tyranny, nobody is safe. When you are at the top, the only way is down, and the fall is usually fatal. 1539. Jane Seymour is dead. Henry needs a new wife. Cromwell looks at the map. He sees a threat from Catholic Europe. He decides England needs a Protestant ally. He suggests a strategic merger with Germany. He suggests Anne of Cleves. We know this story. Hans Holbein paints a beautiful portrait. Henry falls in love with the image. Cromwell negotiates the treaty. It is his masterstroke, a perfect foreign policy alliance. But then, the meeting happens. Henry meets Anne of Cleves. He hates her. He calls her a Flanders mare. He says she smells. He says he can't sleep with her. And who does he blame? Does he blame himself for marrying a stranger? Does he blame the painter? No. He blames the fixer. Henry screams at Cromwell, "You sold me a bad bill of goods. You trapped me. You put me in a yoke." This was Cromwell's first major mistake in a decade. In a normal company, you might get a bad performance review. You might lose your bonus. In Henry VIII's court, A mistake is treason. The Nepo babies, the Duke of Norfolk, and the Catholic faction had been waiting for this moment for years. They hated Cromwell. They hated that a blacksmith's son was telling dukes what to do. They hated his efficiency. They saw blood in the water. They started whispering in Henry's ear, "Cromwell is a heretic. Cromwell is trying to control you. Cromwell is plotting to marry the Princess Mary himself. He thinks he is the king." And Henry, paranoid, sick, angry, and humiliated by his impotency with Anne of Cleves, listened. June 10th, 1540, Cromwell arrives at a Privy Council meeting. He thinks it's business as usual. He sits at the table. Suddenly, the Duke of Norfolk stands up. He walks over to Cromwell and rips the chain of office from Cromwell's neck. He sneers. "Traitors do not sit with gentlemen." Cromwell is arrested. He is dragged to the Tower of London, the same prison he sent Anne Boleyn to, from his damp, cold cell. He writes letters to Henry. These letters are painful to read. They are the letters of a desperate employee trying to explain his work to a boss who has already replaced him. He doesn't beg for his life at first. He begs for Henry to understand the logic. He writes, "I have done my best. I have served you. I have made you rich. I have never betrayed you." He ends with the famous, heartbreaking line, scrawled in messy handwriting because his hands were shaking. "Most gracious prince, I cry for mercy, mercy, mercy." Henry reads the letters. Does he show mercy? No. He uses the information in the letters to get his divorce from Anne of Cleves. He uses Cromwell's legal genius one last time to fix his mess. And then he signs the death warrant. He discarded the most loyal, effective servant he ever had like a used napkin. Here is the twist ending. Cromwell was executed on July 28th, 1540. A few months later, Henry's new marriage to Catherine Howard fell apart because she cheated on him. The government started to fail. The money ran out. The council was arguing. Henry started complaining to his court. He shouted at his ministers, saying, on false accusations, "You made me put to death the most faithful servant I ever had." He blamed them for killing Cromwell. Even though he signed the warrant, he missed Cromwell, not because he loved him, but because nobody else could do the job. It is the ultimate gaslighting move. He killed the fixer, and then complained that nothing was getting fixed. Why does this story hit so hard today? Because Thomas Cromwell is the patron saint of corporate burnout. He represents the ideal employee that every toxic company wants. He was available 24/7. He never said no. He compromised his morals for the company's bottom line. He absorbed all the blame so the boss could look good. And what did it get him? It got him killed. This is the lesson of the scapegoat. When a company fails, or when a CEO makes a bad decision like a bad merger or a bad product launch, they don't blame themselves. They find a Cromwell, they find the middle manager who did the actual work, and they sacrifice them to save the stock price. Henry VIII is the ultimate toxic boss. He is the boss who says, "We are a family," while secretly interviewing your replacement. He is the boss who takes you out for drinks when you are making him money, and ghosts you when you need help. He is the boss who gaslights you into thinking you are the problem. When the problem is his total lack of vision and impulse control, Cromwell's life proves a brutal truth about power. Loyalty only flows one way. You can give a narcissist your soul, you can give them your best years, but the moment you stop being useful or the moment you become inconvenient, you are just an expense on a spreadsheet. But before we feel too sorry for him, we have to admit something uncomfortable. Thomas Cromwell didn't just die. He left a ghost in the machine. In fact, he built the machine. Look at the world you live in right now. Do you have a birth certificate, a social security number, a passport? Do you pay taxes to a central government? Do you vote for laws in a parliament or Congress? Do you hate bureaucracy? Do you hate filling out forms? You can thank or blame Thomas Cromwell for that. Before Cromwell, England was run like a mafia family. The king shouted, and things happened. It was personal. It was chaotic. Cromwell changed the operating system of the Western world. He invented the bureaucracy. He was the first person to say, the state is not just the king. The state is a system. He introduced parish registers recording every baptism, marriage, and burial. He realized that if the government knows who you are, it can tax you, draft you, and control you. He created the concept of big data 500 years before Google, and politically, he did something even more radical. To break the Pope's power, he used Parliament. He established the idea that a king in Parliament can make any law, even laws that change religion. Without meaning to, he laid the foundation for modern democracy. He gave the people's representatives the power to change the world. He handed the weapon to Parliament that they would eventually use to chop off the head of a King Charles I 100 years later. Let's see. Think about the deep state, Yao, think about the technocrats who run the economy while politicians scream on Twitter. That is Cromwell's legacy. He took power away from the Nepo babies in the castles and gave it to the lawyers, the accountants, and the administrators. He proved that a blacksmith's son with a pen could be more powerful than a duke with a sword. So, while Henry VIII gets the fame for having 6 wives, Thomas Cromwell is the reason we have a modern government. He was the first modern politician. He was the first technocrat. And just like today, he showed us that the guy who builds the system is often the first one crushed by its gears. So, what can we learn from the blacksmith's son? Thomas Cromwell was a genius. He was a visionary. He broke the class ceiling and changed England forever. But he made one fatal calculation error. He thought that if he made himself indispensable, he would be safe. He was wrong. Let's see. Are you being a Cromwell at your job right now? Are you doing the dirty work for a boss who wouldn't attend your funeral? Are you sacrificing your ethics for a company that would replace you in a week? Take a lesson from the scaffold on Tower Hill. Do your job, get paid, build your skills, but never, ever give your soul to a king. Because in the end, the axe doesn't care how many hours of overtime you worked. Drop a comment below, was Cromwell a villain or just the world's most tragic employee? And don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace.